I'm only going to talk about the 5-star weapons in the game and 5 4-star weapons in the game. And those are going to be the Rangers series weapon selector box weapons. So let's just start with these mid weapons. First we've got Undying Flame. They're pistols. So that just narrows it down. We've only got 3 characters that use pistols in the game as of 1.0. Increases attack by 20% every 5 seconds while the character does not receive damage. Stacks up twice, lasts for 8 seconds. Taking damage removes stack but increases HP. I'm assuming that the amount of HP that the character restores is not exactly as it says on here. At least I'm hoping that's not what the weapon actually does, because 15 HP is nothing. When you think about long-ranged attacks, obviously you think pistols, but more than anyone, you would think Alto, because his kit revolves around keeping your distance and making sure all of your attacks go through the gate. His ulti that summons a gate and powers your attacks. That being said, it wouldn't be that bad to have this weapon on any of these 3 characters. Number 1 choice though would definitely be Alto. Chixia wouldn't be bad either. Mortefi would be the least one I would recommend to run this weapon on. But if you have Mortefi and you have this weapon, you want to use them, don't have any other weapon, then, you know, it's not the end of the world either, so. Moving on to Comet Flame Rectifier. Got 4 characters that use rectifiers, but... Oh, also I forgot to mention, main stats. The main stat for the Undying Flame pistol is base attack percentage, so again, you know, any attack you can get on your DPS, on Chixia as a DPS, or Alto or Mortefi as sub DPSs is definitely welcome. So that's another reason why running it on the other 2 that aren't Alto wouldn't be that bad. Anyways, Comet Flare, right off the bat, main stat is base HP percentage, and then the effect says when you do basic or heavy attacks, it just increases healing bonus, so that just stop reading. Choices are pretty clear. Bizy or Verena, that's it. If you have Verena, put it on Verena. If you don't have Verena, use Bizy, use it on Bizy. Please do not put it on Encore or Yinlin. Actually, you know what? Nah, never mind. Amity Accord. Base defense as main stat. Effect reads, attack is increased by 20%. And parry damage is increased by 15. Again, I hope that 15 isn't accurate. Hope it's a lot more than that. Should be a lot more than that. For 8 seconds, when dodging or dashing. Restore an unknown amount of HP when hitting enemies with parry. Can be triggered once every 6 seconds. So, gauntlets. Let's go over here to gauntlets. Choice should be pretty obvious. It's just Janshin. If you've got her, or pulled for her, or want to get her, you should definitely put this weapon on her, seeing as it's like her 4-star variant signature weapon. I won't stop you from trying to put it on Lingyan or Yuanwu, but this is gonna serve as your first and last warning not to do it. Commando of Conviction, Sword. Got 4 sword characters, protagonist being one of them, or 2 of them, I guess. When HP is below 15%, damage is increased for heavy attacks. Hitting enemies with heavy attacks restores HP, can only be triggered once every 8 seconds, and it's got base attack percentage as main stat. Again, choice is pretty clear. Danjin. If you want to use Danjin, then you should probably go for this weapon out of the selector box. It's the best weapon that complements her kit, or the way she works. It wouldn't be bad to run it on any of these other characters, but it does resonate the best with Danjin. Dauntless Evernight, Broad Blade. Only got 3 of them, and I think the choice character for this weapon should also be pretty clear. It's got base defense percentage as main stat, first of all. When HP is above 80%, attack is increased. When below 15%, basic and heavy attacks restore HP. obviously Taochi. If you are brave enough, you can run it on Kalachara or GN if you have no other choice. As you may have noticed, each one of these weapons has an ideal user for it. You've got Alto for the pistol, you've got Verena, and if you don't have Verena, Baizi, for the Rectifier, Amity Accord for Janshin, Sword for Danjin, and Broadblade for Taochi. You're welcome to try and experiment with any other character, but these weapons are all at a similar level of value, so I would suggest basing your choice off of what character you want to use rather than which weapon you should select, right? So if you want to use any of these 5 characters, then you should your choice should be pretty clear as to which weapon you would want to pick. If you're not particular about playing or maining or using any of these characters, then you should probably go with the Comet Flame Rectifier because it's the most versatile one, right? You are undoubtedly going to need a healer eventually. Now, moving on to the 5-star weapons, you may have noticed that all of the standard 5-star weapons share a part of their effect, and that is energy regen is increased by 12.8%, which increases the versatility in each and every one of them. But then again, you can make the argument that each of these 5-star weapons has an ideal user. It's just a matter if you have the character for them. So the gauntlets, let's go back to our gauntlet users. When skill hits target, a basic attack is increased, and when basic attack hits target, skill is increased. So ideally, you'd want to choose a character who does most of their damage through basics and skills. You could put it on Yanshin, you could put it on Lingyan. Lingyan wouldn't actually be that bad, but I would put it on Yuan Wu, first of all, because as I've mentioned in a lot of my videos, Yuan Wu is a very versatile character, can fit into any team composition, maybe not being the best in slot for the main DPS, but definitely getting the job done. His entire kit revolves around having his skill up. Even his ulti is an empowered version of his skill, so having more skill damage on him makes absolute sense. So for my pick for this weapon, number 1 pick would be Yuan Wu. You could do with Ling Yang as well. Yanshin would be my least favorited for this weapon. Next up is Cosmic Ripples, the Rectifier. Here we go with the Rectifiers. When basic attack hits target, basic attack damage is increased. You could get away with putting it on any 4 of these characters because it is damage oriented and it still has energy regen, which is nice on all of these characters as well. But if you are going to pick the healer 4-star weapon, then it wouldn't really make sense to put this 5-star weapon on either of the healers. Unless you have no choice, right? Unless you have both healers and you don't have either Encore or Yinlin when she drops, then it's totally okay to put this 5-star weapon on either healer. Ideally, my number 1 pick would be Encore. Obviously, she's got a lot of damage through her basic attacks and then her empowered basic attacks through her ulti. You just gotta make a conscious effort to mainly use her basic attacks and not fool around too much with the heavy attacks. Moving on to the Emerald of Genesis, it's a sword. So here's my sword users. When skill hits target, attack is increased, stacks up twice for 10 seconds. This is very versatile. It can fit on any 4 of these characters because it increases attack. Any one of these 4 characters could use attack. If you're using Yang Yang as sub DPS, attack wouldn't be bad at all. Rover, obviously having most of their kit being main DPS oriented, could do with the damage boost. Sanhua as well. even as a sub DPS, this weapon would be super good on her. And Danjin. My number one pick for this weapon would have to be either Danjin or Rover. Because Danjin, even though she is supposed to be nerfed on release compared to the closed beta tests, she is still going to be a solid option for a main DPS. And her value increases the higher your skill is in the game. Rover, I would put at first place tied with Danjin because even though they aren't really that big of a deal in terms of kit and damage, we will be getting copies of them as we progress through the story, and it's going to get to a point where we're going to have duplicates for them, and we're going to have their resonance chain up to a certain level versus all of the other characters that we're probably not going to have any copies for, maybe one at best. And this is strictly speaking on early game, because once we get to mid game, late game, and we start getting copies of other characters, obviously they're gonna start outshining Rover. But for early game purposes, first of all, building Rover is not a bad idea if you want to rock them, and putting this weapon on them, if you get it, would also not be that big of a deal. It would actually be one of the best things you can do for early to maybe even mid-game. Lustrous Razor, the Broadblade, back to our 3 Broadblade users. When skill hits target, ulti damage is increased, can stack twice. You can get away with, you can run this on any 3 of these. And if you're getting GN, I would highly recommend you also go for his weapon, because obviously that's his best in slot. For this standard 5-star weapon, if you have Kalchara, he would be a number 1 choice, simply because GN already has his weapon, and assuming you go for GN, you should also go for his weapon, right? So because of that, I'm gonna be putting Kalchara in first place, GN in second, Taochi is third, but not because this weapon doesn't work with her, because it does to a certain extent, but mainly she's in third place because of her lackluster damage, and obviously being compared to the 2 biggest hitters in the game at launch is a little unfair. Static Mist, the pistols, go back to our 3 pistol users. Performing outro skill, attack for party members is increased by 10%. You can only get a stack of this, singular stack of this, lasts for 14 seconds. This is Mortifi 110%, 200% in fact. Being the sub DPS that he is, and wanting to do as much off-field damage as possible, having an outro skill buff is super nice for him. You could run it on Alto and Chixia if you were running them as sub DPSs. Well, in Chixia's case, you would be running her in a dual DPS team, just because her kit doesn't really allow for the sub DPS, doesn't really have room for her to be ran as a sub DPS. But yeah, number 1 pick, absolutely, for the Static Mist pistols, Mortifi. Second pick would be Alto, just because he does have sub DPS potential, and Chixia, because she is more of a main damage dealer, or at least designed to be that way, and this weapon is targeted for either sub DPSs or supports, but since we don't have a pistol using support character, then it goes to the sub DPSs by default. Now we're gonna get into the character specific weapons. We've got the String Master, and that's Yinlin's weapon, which is not going to be available on launch. It's going to be available June 12th when her banner comes around. This is a very good weapon. And notice that Ji-Yan's signature weapon as well shares the same initial effect as the String Master, in that all resonance damage is increased by 12%. You just flat out, no requirements, no baloney, you get an increase to all resonance damage by 12%. No strings attached. And now reading more into Yinlin's weapon, after casting ulti or outro skill, attack is increased by 12%, could be stacked up to 2 layers, lasts for 2 seconds. So you can get up to a 24% attack increase by using ulti and then the outro skill, but they would only last for 2 seconds, which is a little weird. So as long as you output all the damage that you need from the incoming character off of the switch, you shouldn't have a problem using this weapon, but I'm finding it a little hard to believe that it lasts for 2 seconds, unless this is inaccurate. Maybe it's different on game launch day, or, well, this weapon isn't going to be available on game launch day, but when the weapon releases on June 12th, we'll see if it actually does last for 2 seconds or not. But yeah, just keep in mind that the buffs are great, but they last for not too long. Also, I've been forgetting to mention, Static Mist and Emerald of Genesis weapons have base crit rate as a main stat, 5.4 initial level 1, which is crazy. Yes, crit rate I don't think is the most ideal stat on Mortifi, unless you build them with crit, in which case it should be good. That's just something to keep in mind. Whereas the other 3 standard 5-star weapons have base attack percentage as a main stat. And it's interesting to note that the Rectifier is the only one that has 12% base attack instead of 8%, which means that our Rectifier user, our number 1 pick, Encore, is gonna get even more out of this weapon. And then moving on to our final weapon of the day, the Verdant Summit, Jian's signature weapon. Base crit damage, 10.8% base crit damage at level 1 is insane. He shares the same 12% buff to all damage as Yinlin's weapon. And then it reads, Skill or Liberation gives 24% heavy attack damage increase. And it can be stacked twice, lasts for 14 seconds, so you can get up to 48% of heavy attack damage increase by using intro skill and ulti. Because of this weapon alone, I dare say, I do declare that Jian's team might outperform Calcharo's team. Even with Yinlin and her signature weapon, I think Jian's weapon is broken. I think it's way too good. Not only is it the only 5-star weapon in the game to have crit damage as main stat, but 48% increase in heavy attacks that you can do. It's just bonkers. Well, anyways, that's about it. See ya.